Great to be here with you guys this evening to have this webinar today. I know it's recorded, so if anyone misses any bits of it in the beginning, you can watch again, which is always great. Um, Before we get started, it would just be so great for me to give you a little bit more. So you can just pop in the chat what year you're in, what you're studying. So if you're not studying, if you are a staff member, just pop it in there as well and say what you do. And then we will sort of really get this started. So just put it in the chat box there, your year and what you're studying. Amazing. Okay, engineering. Thank you for coming, Sam. Andy, HR, thank you. Andy, Hannah, third agricultural student, placement at the minute, originally from Birmingham. Amazing. Welcome, Hannah. Hannah, I'm currently in Birmingham as well with my brother, so I feel like already house common. Student staff member, amazing. Hannah, I'm actually from London, but my brother lives in Birmingham, close to the airport. I can't really say where it is because I don't really know Birmingham, but it's close to the airport. So there we go. That's something. Thank you so much for coming, Hannah, as well. Great. So just a little bit about me. As you already know, my name is Toluwa, and I'm a speaker and wellbeing coach. And so what I love doing on a day-to-day is talk about mental well-being and mental well-being in the place of work, mental well-being students, mental well-being at home, but basically just talking about practical tips, practical day-to-day tips to actually take care of our emotional and mental health. Today's a little bit different, right? Because we're talking about am I enough on allyship. And so the aim of this seminar is to have that discussion, is to really just be open, be vulnerable. Any sort of thoughts you have, no question is too silly, no thought is too silly, but it's to really have that sort of open discussion. I'm going to be sharing some mental well-being tips as well. So I do, if you have notebooks, if you have your phone, do take some notes because these things are going to be important in the long term, in the long run. And so I'm going to read out a couple of statements in a second. But before I read it out, the second thing I want you to do for me this evening is to just write down your expectations from this seminar. So why have you come? What brought you here, really? What are your expectations? What would you want to get out of when it's 8 p.m.? So after the 60 minutes together, what would you say you want to be able to have learned to get out of this seminar? So give it a couple of minutes and just share your expectations. If you don't have any expectations for this seminar, that's good as well. You can just say, actually, I have no expectations. I just came because I saw it. I thought it looked cool, whatever it is. But it'd be really good for me to know just where your heads are at the minute. So just share your expectations with me. So just give it a couple of minutes there. Thank you, Andy. That is definitely very HR. So ideas that I can discuss with our equality and working group, amazing. Hannah, how to be a better ally and how to make this very visible to my peers. Thank you so much for that. I definitely would hope that something like this is you're going to get some form of idea at least as to how to continue this conversation, Lauren, to have a deeper understanding of how I can be an ally and be supportive. And then keep your comments coming, keep questions coming with as we go on with this seminar this evening. So I'm going to share my screen in a second. And when I share my screen, this is why about the hand raising button, is I'm going to read out a couple of statements. And if any of those statements resonate with you, you maybe said it before to yourself, you said it to your friend, just do the hand raising emoji. Or if it's easier, you could just type yes in the chat box. But it's just to get a sense of the room. So here we go. Can everybody see my screen okay? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Amazing. Thanks. Amazing. So the first statement is you are worried about whether you are liked and accepted by people of color. So when this discussion comes about, this sort of anxious thoughts come into your head. You're worried about whether you're liked and accepted by color. Second statement is you always ask yourself how these sorts of conversations benefit you. Like, okay, I'm coming, if I go to this webinar, if I go to this seminar, if I go to this event about racial conversations, how does it actually benefit me? Third statement, you refuse to listen or feel anything when people of color share their truths, and you're simply waiting anxiously for your turn to speak. If you've ever felt like this before, certainly I know sometimes even in my line of work, I always have to catch myself because sometimes I have to ask myself, am I actually listening to what they're saying, or am I just thinking of what do I want to say next? So this is where this particular statement lies. You're asking people of color to educate you over and over again and not really understanding if they ever told you to educate yourself. So if someone ever told you to look it up on Google or to read a book, you've never really understood that. You feel an overwhelming urge to exclaim the phrase, "I'm not like that," when people of color express anger or frustration at white people. Or quite frankly, you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the whole situation of racial inequalities and thinking, what can I really do about it? What can I really do about it? So if any of those statements resonate with you, again, you can just put in your hand raised. Andy, thank you so much for sharing that. I say those statements because in this seminar, I'm not here to actually get into heated discussions about this. My priority here is your well-being as allies in a very turbulent storm. So what I'm going to ask you is to humor me, to humble me for the next couple of minutes. Some of the things you might not understand, but I really do hope that by the end of the webinar, it would all start to make sense. And this is what I mean when I say humor me, because I'm going to be using the plant analogy for this seminar this evening. So I want you to imagine you are a seed. And in any seed, right? Any seed, you need good soil to be able to grow. You need soil to be able to actually bloom into the beautiful flower, beautiful fruit tree that you were designed to be. In this context, the good soil in this situation is self-love. Self-love. First thing I really want to talk about today is actually this concept of love and actually what it means, it looks like to love yourself. I truly believe that all of the problems, at least most of the issues that we have today, start from a broken society that is without love, self-love. I think we've spent so much as a society comparing ourselves to others, which stirs envy and jealousy that we have actually forgotten to look inward to what we love about ourselves. Because the truth is, if you cannot love yourself, how can you actually show that to other person? How can you show up for other people? So really and truly, it all brings us back to the basic that a lot of us already know, is that it starts from us and it starts from here. So the question then becomes, how do we nurture love? Because we cannot have a discussion about allyship or about showing up for another person, showing up for other people of color, if we don't get the foundation right. If we're not asking, hang on a minute, how do I even show up for myself? So the next couple of minutes, I just want to share a couple of tips, a couple of key hacks, if you may, on actually how to nurture self-love. And the first is self-awareness. Self-awareness. For me, I honestly think this is the latest form of self-love. Self-awareness really means that you are aware of your strengths, you are aware of your weaknesses, and more importantly, in context, you are aware of your triggers. Aware of your strengths, your weaknesses, and your triggers. So let's just break that down a little bit more. Strengths and weaknesses help us with inner validation. Inner validation. So allyship is not about seeking validation from people of color to get the pat on the back that you are the good kind of white person, you are the kind of person we like or we welcome, because actually that really defeats the point of these of conversations. Inner validation comes from you. It's decentering yourself. Going from how can I make them like me to how can I be better by them? How can I make them like me to how can I be better by them? Inner validation means that you're asking yourself, how can you use your strengths to leverage the challenges in this situation? How can you use your strengths to make to think of solutions, to actually be more inclusive at your workplace or more inclusive in your friendship group? To leverage the challenges in this situation. Because this allows you to so quickly overwhelmed by the situation, the news, everything else that is going on, because you're just pressing that pause button to ask yourself, what are my strengths and how can I use it to leverage the situation in front of me? I want to mention earlier that this seminar is an interactive session. So it's going to be broken down by reflection activities from time to time with activities that you're going to see on my screen. And I really encourage you to just really get into these activities, because the more you engage, the more you can actually get out of this. So right now we're going into that first activity, which is your strengths. So right now, I just want you to think. I want you to, if you're a staff member, I actually just want you to take away all of the titles that come with your role. If you're a student, I want you to take all of the titles that come with your identity as a student and just focus in, zoom in on yourself right now and ask yourself, what are my strengths? A strength can be patience, positive energy, a smile, organization skills. It can be anything that comes natural to you that you might not even think is a strength, but the fact that it comes more natural to you actually has that strength. So the first thing I want us to think about this evening is, what are my strengths and how can I use it to leverage this situation in front of me? So this situation of racial injustice, of equality, bringing in more diversity. But actually the importance of this activity is not even the second half of the question. I just want to find out, what are your strengths? So we're going to take a couple of minutes to just think about that. And then when you're ready, you can just pop it in the chat box. Just share a little bit about your strengths. And if you're finding it difficult, well, to think about a strength, that's okay. You could type that in as well. That's okay. Actually, I don't even know my strengths. I can't really think of anything now. But it'd be great to hear from you. If you're just joining us, welcome. You can just dive right into the activity. We are taking the activity and just thinking about, what are my strengths? So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes. Okay, thank you so much, Roberta. You have a sense of humor. Amazing. Love that. Humor goes a long way. Hannah, patience, good control of my emotions or thoughts, which help me listen to others and stay optimistic and positive. So many strengths that you've mentioned, Hannah. Like, that is so fantastic. I think the mixture of optimism and being positive is so necessary right now. Stephen, patience, humor, activity. I am loving the humor that is coming out in this group. It's always needed. Sam, friendly, positive, naive, um, in, inquisitive, amazing. Um, Thank you so much, guys. That is amazing. We have some more coming in, caring about people, animals, the world, smiley. I can definitely testify to that, Lauren, just knowing you in the time that we've worked together, definitely. It's here, and actually just maybe thinking about your strengths is something that you're struggling with. That's okay. What I will say as a practical tip, just quickly before we move on to the next thing, is journaling, writing down about your day really helps to realize the bits about your day that you've enjoyed and why you've enjoyed them. Because oftentimes, when we enjoy something, when we feel all this range of positive emotions, oftentimes it's because we're using our strengths. I enjoyed my day today because I was laughing a lot. Why was I laughing a lot? Because I was using my humor, and that's a strength. So I would just encourage you to pick up journaling. You don't have to be a writer to put words down to paper. You can use your phone, etc. But reflecting about your day on a consistent basis really helps discover what those strengths are. So we've written down our strengths, and a lot of you mentioned things like optimism, humor, just being a great human being in general, to be honest. But you see, when and I'm going to talk about the second half of this activity, which is how can we leverage our strengths in this sort of situation. But the other thing I think is important to mention right now when we're talking about inner validation is that validation matters when it comes from you, like inner validation, as we've said. So you're not thinking about just trying to get people of color to pat you on the back to, yes, this is good, or even like people around you, like your community, to say, this is good. It has to come from here, that you actually want to do it. You're actually using your strengths, things that you already enjoy, to change the situation for the positive that is in front of you. But the second thing about validation is about your environment. Your environment. There's a Nigerian proverb, I'm originally Nigerian. There's a Nigerian proverb that says, the birds will never discover its true abilities if it keeps trying to be like the monkey. The bird will never discover its true abilities if it keeps trying to be like the monkey, climb trees or hang on monkey bars when it can actually fly over them. I love this proverb so much because actually it just summarizes why it is so key, especially now when we're trying to talk about such a massive issue of race. Why it's so key to not just as an ally look at what everybody else is doing, but actually you focusing in on yourself and say, what am I good at already? What are my strengths? And how can I use that to support the people around me? How can I use that to be more inclusive? How can I use that to be more diverse? Again, in my staff network, in my friendship group, how can I use that to really push people and to really support this cause? For your strength to really grow, for that seed that we spoke about earlier, to really go and nurture, it needs to be placed in the right environment. So embedding yourself in an environment of constant learning, of people who are open, of people who are willing to listen, and you are also listening as well, that gets you to a place where you are not only dismayed by the ugliness of racism, but also how the system of whiteness has contributed to that racism. and where you need to show up. Conversations of race or diversity can be hard. It is tough to hear. There's no doubt about that. Other times, these conversations can be so uncomfortable and get people ridden with guilt and feeling overwhelmed that it gets you to a place of complacency or not taking action. But when you reverse, you understand that there is a problem right here. You understand the issue. And you're focusing inward to say, what are my unique characteristics? How can I use optimism to be able to influence those around me? Humor is so needed in times of pain. How can I use that to lift people's spirits up? How can I use patience to really be able to learn from people of color, learn from people who don't look like me? And even how can I use that to change things that I need to in order for the system to be anti-racist? I know that a lot of you wouldn't be here right now if you're not ready to be challenged, right? So the main thing here that I want to just point out is that you can only nurture this seed by using your strengths and focusing on what you can do. And there's a lot of emphasis there on can, because the reality is you cannot do everything. You cannot change everybody's mind. A lot of the time when I have conversations with people who are keen to be allies, it can get so overwhelming that you almost want to do every single part, every single aspect of tackling systematic racism. But that is impossible because no one man was meant to fight an issue by themselves. We have to come together, and by coming together, it's also by recognizing the differences in us, the differences in what we're good at, the differences in how we are unique, and how we can use that to change the situation in front of us. The second thing I really want to mention here, earlier when I spoke about self-awareness, I mentioned 3 things, right? I said strengths, weaknesses, and your triggers. Now, something I really want to mention here is that knowing your triggers in this sort of discussion is so important. Knowing your triggers, that can be social media, that can be heated conversations, that can be just the news that you read on BBC, etc. If it's triggering unproductive anger in you that leads to an action or behavior that is counterproductive, and you need to take a step. If it's not coming from a place of love, if it's not coming from a place of me, like, okay, what is it that I can actually do, or what is it that I can do to support my network to be able to do, to be able to feel empowered? Earlier, I mentioned decentering yourself. So it's not about you trying to get people of color to educate you, pat you on the back, etc., etc. But it's actually just knowing when something is unproductive, because a lot of people want to make change. Unfortunately, there's a lot of toxic information out there as well. You have to know yourself. Something triggers you a lot, where you feel so angry, you feel emotional to the point where you're not doing anything. That is counterproductive. You want to be able to read books, you want to be able to engage in information, you want to be able to go to seminars that leave you feeling empowered and not depowered, that leave you feeling like actually you are enough to create this change in your network, rather than you feeling like, well, I guess that's it. There's nothing else for me to do. Because the truth is, this sort of conversation can start your own mental health to a point where you cannot even see clearly. So a practical tip that I want to give to you really quickly, because it's so hard sometimes to know if whatever action or behavior or even thought process that you're engaging in, if it's coming from a place of love, of production, or if it's coming from a place of anger that is counterproductive. So a practical tip I want to give you is asking yourself why. Asking yourself why 3 times. So, why am I feeling this way? Okay, I'm feeling this way because I just saw this information on Instagram that made me really angry. Okay, why did it make me really angry? It was talking about like children who are killed by the police, for example, in America, etc., etc. Okay, why am I feeling angry about that particular situation itself? Just trying to break it down step by step keeps you in tune with your feeling, your emotion. And also helps with that inner validation that we spoke about earlier. Because seeking third party approval and people pleasing for the wrong reasons is one of the main causes of internal depression and stress. We end up blaming the government, the weather, other people, and every other circumstance for our own choices. The reality of the situation is that when we're talking about diversity, talking about equity, when we're talking about how we can be more inclusive, we have that power to create whatever we put our minds to. But this includes both good and bad aspects. So just being in tune with your feelings, being in tune more with making a particular move, why you're in a certain way, questioning yourself, is this coming from a place of love? Is it coming from a place of anger, of hatred, or is it coming from a place that I want approval? And that helps us to just think a little bit more clearly in terms of actions that we can take when it comes to this particular topic. So we've spoken about the seed now. Now let's move on to the next part. So now we have our seed. Now we've put it in good soil. It's all about love, the basics. And now the branches start to grow. We've started to build on our strengths. We're aware of our strengths. We're aware of our inner validation. We're triggers, asking us why. Now we're moving on to the branches that are in fact vulnerabilities. So why have I added vulnerabilities here? Why do I think it is so important to mention that before we actually get to the fruit of this seed, the beautiful flower, the beautiful plant that it was meant to be, we need to be vulnerable, to come as we are in order to really get the best version of ourselves. You see, the first thing here is that when people of color, or any liberation group for that matter, when we share our stories with people, we share them with people who have earned the right to hear them. It's a privilege to be able to hear somebody else's story, somebody else's reality. So when someone shares their story with you, as an ally, as somebody who doesn't experience that same reality, you need to be able to recognize that. You need to be able to recognize that privilege, that opportunity. Because the truth is, we don't share, and by we, I'm actually just talking about humans in general, we don't really share our abilities with everyone, right? We share vulnerabilities with people who we think, actually, I trust this person to some extent. I've opened up to this person to some extent, and I'm not just even talking about race. So right now, I just want you to think back to a similar situation on when you were vulnerable with somebody, when you opened up to somebody. Why did you open up? What were the particular reasons behind opening up to them? This was from my thinker, so we're just going to give it a couple of minutes. But just thinking back to your reality, to be able to understand why being vulnerable matters in this sort of conversation. I just want to think back to when you were vulnerable with somebody. Like, and by vulnerable, I mean it in the lighter sense, as in that you're just opening up to somebody that maybe it could be in your workplace, it could be your friendship group, just that you were stressed and you opened up about that to somebody else. But what made you open up? Why did you decide to open up with that particular person in mind? So just give it a couple of seconds. And then when you're ready, you can just share it in the chat box. Why did you decide to open up with them? What were those particular qualities the person had that made you feel comfortable to be able to open up to somebody else? And don't even think too deep. This could have happened yesterday. You could have opened up to your dog. Like, but why? What were those things that just made you want to open up? And it could just be something like the slightest reason, like I say, stress. It doesn't even have to be like a mental issue that you were going through. So we have from Sam to have a more meaningful conversation with someone. Yep. Okay. Get them to cooperate, to gain their trust. Very, very key. Stephen, thanks for that. Hannah, I opened up to my boyfriend as we got to know each other, but particularly because he's quiet, gentle listener, and he always validates my feelings. Like if I'm upset, he will reassure me that it's okay, etc. I love that so much. Just the things that we've shared right now. So Sam, you saying to have a deeper and more meaningful conversation with somebody. I'm just going to take your statements, if you don't mind, to really see how this works when we're talking about race. When a person of color gains the nerves to open up on any level, this could be to you personally, this could be on a blog that you read and somebody sent to you. The time behind that is because they want to have more meaningful conversations, more productive conversations. They want to have conversations that actually lead to meaningful action. So a lot of the time, like I said before, we don't share our vulnerabilities for no reason. We share them because there's a healing in that process. Stephen, to get them to cooperate, so to gain their trust. Again, I even remember in my own life when I've shared stories of just racial inequalities in the workplace with my co-workers or with my heads of department. I'm not just sharing that because I think, oh, it would get them to like me a little bit more. No, there's a trust level there. There's something that, there's a relationship that I'm wanting us to build. And Hannah, you mentioned such a valid point in validating my feelings. In validating my feelings. I really love that. Because the thing about vulnerabilities is that it's a two-way process. Those qualities that you've defined in the people that are up to you, as allies, those are the same qualities you want to think about when someone opens up to you. But like the important thing here is that the healing is in the sharing. It's not in the response. It's not in what they want to hear back. So when you have conversations about equality and diversity, it's really not in the response in the sense of you have a person of color, for example, and you have the ally. The sharing is the healing process. The sharing, the fact that I'm vulnerable and I'm open with you, firstly, is in that healing is as a person of color, is for me to heal. And validation comes from recognizing that hurt, that pain, that journey. Thank you for sharing this. That's real validation. Thank you for sharing. Rebecca, I'm just seeing your message because they were listening and genuinely cared. 100% that, because what I love so much right now is that the qualities mentioned in are human, right? They're so real. Oftentimes, the unfortunate thing is when people of color sometimes open up about things that are going on, They often get things like, sure. Are you sure that really happened though? Is that really your story? But you would always know when someone genuinely cares about what you're saying, when someone is actually listening to what you're saying, what they're back. Are you guys still me? You could just do the hand raising so I know that you guys are still here. Amazing. So I think it is important that as we're embedding ourselves in the right kind of environment that allows growth, allows adjustment, not toxic, not filled by unproductive anger, that we remember that it is really about that other person, not about our feeling allies, not about what should I say next, not about us, that we're open to listen, but more importantly, to adjust. Because constantly asking the person who has opened up to you things like, okay, how can I be better? Which is like, quite fortunately, a lot of allies seem to ask in this sort of conversations, how can I be better? And that is a good question in itself. But actually, what you're asking is, give me the answers. I don't want to really do the work. Just tell me what to do. And that itself can be traumatic because it brings back emotional stress for the person who has just opened up to you. So there's an important factor here of a willingness to change, which is hard, which is uncomfortable. But no good change ever came from a place of comfort. You have to be uncomfortable. Something has to break, something has to shift in order for something better to come out of it. Sometimes it takes us being in a place of being uncomfortable to learn something new. Have those challenging conversations that you're taking on the idea that actually I don't know it all. And that's why I am always actually cautious about the word allies, because you can fully be an ally. You're always an ally in training. It's a long-term process. It's a long-term growth. Saying you're an ally, you're saying actually I'm just in a situation right now. So it might be different. I might not actually really care about what's going on. But ally training is saying, I am ready to be challenged in a new but good way that elevates growth and it's long term because you're always learning. The truth is, everybody's different, even as people of color. There's intersectionalities, right, that come into play. So everybody's experience is different. So you always have to be in a state of just being willing to learn, willing to listen, willing to adjust where needed. So we're going to go to the next part of the beautiful plant analogy, which is the leaves. So now the branches have grown, now the leaves start to bloom. And here I've put relationships. You see, when the seed has been planted in the right soil of self-love, of loving yourself, of inner validations, only then, like I say, can you be able to show that to somebody. And that comes through building relationships. Love is intentional. Change is intentional. It doesn't just happen on a whim. We can only really start to heal as a nation, to heal as a society, as a community, to be real allies in training when we start to build real relationships with other people who look like us. And what that means is getting to know someone as a human first, before anything else. Engaging with people's humanity before we can actually get access to the real needs. Like we just spoke about being open and vulnerable. You can only really be vulnerable to really know what someone is going through to really know their story, to really know actually how it can be a change, how you can be a voice when you've built relationship with somebody else. So to really be an ally in this space, to be this ally, we need to cultivate genuine relationships, even in the places or with the people that make us uncomfortable. And by relationships, I don't mean just like fake relationships, like you see a color and you're like, hi, I want to be your friend. Because actually, no one makes friends like that. If I came up to you right now and I just said, I really love your hair, I would love to be your friend, you're probably going to think, I don't think this friendship is based on a real foundation. So if our foundation of love is actually real, building relationships comes naturally. I'm going to give you an example that happened to me in my life. I was in New York in February and I went to a really nice restaurant with my friends. And me and my friends were the only people of color in that restaurant. And so I remember, and naturally, on a normal day, I don't have makeup. I wear like a hoodie, tracks, hey, it was just lunch. So yeah, but people were dressed nicely in that restaurant, etc., which is grand, which is fine. But I remember as I was leaving, as I walked into the restaurant, a lady that we were sat next to clenched her bag, and I was with myself and three other guys. So clenched her bag really, really tightly, and I noticed that really subtly, but we kept on eating. But as our lunch went on, I could see the lady kept staring at us in a not great way. You always get that sort of energy when someone is looking at you. I don't know if it's happened to you, but when someone is staring at you, you always know, right? But this lady kept staring at us, not in a good way, and then later told the waiter if she could move tables. And unfortunately, because the restaurant was really busy, she had to stay there. But I don't think she knew that I heard the conversation. Like I have really, really good ears, like an elephant. So I actually heard that conversation going on. And I noted that. But as I stood up to go to the toilet, I went to her and I just complimented her. I was like, excuse me. And she was like, what? You know, clenched her bag again, like I had a knife in my purse. And I said, I really love your blouse. It looks so beautiful on you. Where from? That second, it's like she saw, like her face, her emotions, everything about her clenched face just changed. And she was like, oh my gosh, yes. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I didn't know it today. You know, I'm not really an orange person. And honestly, we had a conversation for about 15 minutes that came from, excuse me, I really love your blouse. I often tell that story to people of color for a particular reason that sometimes racism on an individual level, I'm not even talking about systematic, comes because somebody else doesn't understand you. They don't understand your culture. They don't understand your story. They don't understand your reality because all they know about who you are has come from the media. So we have to start breaking down that silos. And that is the same even on an allyship level. Sometimes it's just taking that intentional first step. It could be something as little as, I really love the bag that you're carrying, where is it? And that might spark conversation if it's in the same organization. That might spark conversation if you're already in the same course, if you're already in the same seminar, lecture. That is the first step in actually getting to know somebody a little bit more, just cultivating an honest human relationship. So my main point here is that if there's one thing you're actually going to take from today, the biggest advice I can give to people who ask me, how can I continue to be an ally in training, is to create relationships. Create relationships with people that don't look like you. Be intentional about it. because love is emotional. People that don't behave like you, they don't have backgrounds like you, creating relationships with them. Sometimes it might just be that you have to volunteer in a particular youth group, like whatever it is, whatever liberation group that you're trying to break down those silos. Creating relationship is often just what is needed, because it's in the relationships that we find out not how much we don't have in common, not how much is different between me and them and us, what separates us, but actually we find out how much we do have in common. So to really get to the fruits of the seed, everything comes together. Everything that we've said this evening, with vulnerabilities, with self-awareness, with our strengths, with our triggers, all of that comes with intentionally making it in the back of your mind frame to build authentic relationships. Because the truth is, this is not something you can just do whenever you feel like. It has to be part of who you are. And because of that, I said before, no one can ever fully be an ally. It doesn't matter what liberation group. I can never fully be an ally for LGBTQ communities because that's not right. But I can be an ally in training, constantly learning, constantly innovating, constantly telling myself, how am I going to show up for myself so that I can show up for somebody else? How do I recognize my strengths? How do I love myself to be able to give somebody else? So my last question for you today is, what are you going to start doing differently? What are you going to do differently when it comes to these conversations, when it comes to, this sort of conversations where people are talking about racial inequalities, etc., the Black Lives Matter movement? What are you going to start doing differently? It might be things that we've said in here, the seminar today. It might be things that actually you've already thought about. We've not even mentioned it today, but other people can learn from you. Other people can share with you in your journey with what you're doing. So just a couple of minutes. What are you going to start doing differently today? When you're ready, you type that in again in the chat box. Lauren, thank you. So be there, listen, appreciate how I can use my skills to support and act. Thank you. I will more likely smile and say hello to people who look scary or dodgy and try to remove preconceptions. That's so great, Sam. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hannah, recognizing my triggers and racism and asking why more. I know I get angry if someone is being casually racist. Definitely. And you know, this sort of topic, this conversation, honestly, is constant. You know, is you being consistent, and like I mentioned before, is your type of environment matters, who you're engaging with, the sort of network you're engaging with, because sometimes you could put that same seed in the wrong environment, even if it's in good, even if it's starting from love, and it's never going to grow. If you put an orange seed, for example, imaginative, an orange seed in like an apple garden, just, you know, the environment, just apples when it grow there. The orange seed is going to be a little bit confused. Like, why am I even in this garden? Everybody else is apples. Like, I'm never going to be like them. And unfortunately, some people are never going to change, especially when it comes to this sort of conversations. And I think, first of all, is acknowledging that. So surrounding yourself with the environment also helps with recognizing those triggers as well. Like, what is making me really angry that it becomes overwhelming, it becomes too emotional, it becomes unproductive, counterproductive. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Hannah. Stephen, to be more positive about relationships, don't be burdened by the fear that my motives might be questioned or judged. Definitely. So thank you so much for sharing that, guys. Um, I think the biggest takeaway, if I was going to summarize two key things from today, I think the first thing when we talk about, am I enough? The reality is, as an ally in training, you are enough. 100%. Because when you're focused in on what comes natural to you, your strengths, and you're using that to be able to support people, you're using that to be able to bring the best out of people, you're using that to be able to hear and listen and create relationships, that is to change. And it's constant, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. 99% of that is uncomfortable, it's hard. But it's to be consistent and keep going because it's coming from a place of love. So my biggest takeaway from it definitely be self-awareness and creating relationships. And just remembering those two things go hand in hand as well. I'm going to stop there for this evening. If you have any questions, please do ask. You can use the Q&A box. You can obviously in the chat. Any questions that we might have today in the seminar, but any questions you might also just have about this topic in itself, please do ask. Whilst we still have a couple of minutes left, I'm going to also put in the feedback form. And in that feedback form are things like what are the sort of topics I'd like to hear, etc. So please do, I do encourage you to fill in the feedback. That would be really useful for me and how we provide value when it comes to engaging in this sort of seminars. So that's it. Feedback form. I'm going to stop sharing mine as well. So yes, if you have any questions, thank you so much, Andy. Please do let me know. If you don't, it's been so wonderful to see you guys and to just engage in the session this evening. I'll be here till 8 o'clock. So thank you, Sam. Yes, definitely. That was, I mean, I'm so happy that happened to me, Sam. You know, like you mentioned, you love the story about the blouse, because honestly, that really changed my perspective. It's just how we can start change, just relationships, just by making a compliment, and look at how that changed. Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going to be here till 8. So please, if you have any questions, thank you. If you don't, that's also fine. You can find me on, my information is in the feedback form as well. Email me if you have any more questions. LinkedIn, social, all of those stuff. My information is in there. But it's been such a pleasure having you guys tonight. So thank you so much.